Good afternoon. My name is Krista Hughes and I work at NOACA as an educational technologist, and thank you for joining us for the TILO Presents session, the webinar today. We have with us Lynn Lease, who is going to be doing a presentation for us. And this session is scheduled to be about an hour long with time for questions and answers. And if you are new to Hangouts on Air, I'll explain that a little bit. You can watch this through the Google Plus page on our TILO page, or you can watch this through our YouTube link that was sent for anyone that might have registered for this webinar. There is a Q&A box if you are joining us live today for this webinar. There is a Q&A box that will pop up on the side of your screen. Feel free to post any questions that you might have in there for Lynn. And as she's giving her presentation, I will be monitoring that Q&A box, and I will pop in every now and again to ask those questions to Lynn, and then she will just go ahead and answer them. If you are viewing this later on at a later date, you can also post things on our Google Plus page, the TILO page, and we can respond to those as well. But we thank you for joining us if you are joining us live, and we're excited for anyone that is going to join us in the future. Other than that Q&A box and the Google Plus page, there's really no other chat or anything like that, so just feel free to post on either of those locations, the Q&A for the YouTube channel or on the Google Plus page. So without further ado, we are going to introduce Lynn Lease. Thank you again for joining us for our TILO Presents session today. And I am going to go ahead, Lynn, if you can turn on your mic and turn on your camera, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. My name is Lynn Lease, and I'm the director of the Center for Educational Excellence at the University of Northwestern Ohio in Lima, Ohio. And I serve our on-campus faculty offering support in their teaching and learning endeavors. I provide professional development and scholarship opportunities through workshops and faculty learning communities and one-on-one consultations. I provide teaching and learning information and research-proven best practices. In addition, I'm also a licensed educator in the state of Ohio for grades 1 through 8, and I hold a reading endorsement. In the past, I taught 7th grade language arts in Dayton, Ohio, and I also taught reading during the summer reading program at one of the elementary schools. I'm currently finishing my dissertation for my PhD in education, and I'm specializing in instructional design for online learning. My dissertation study included an investigation of the use of free pre-designed interactive learning objects, which is what I'm talking about today. So today I want to share with you some important information from my dissertation investigation, including the types of and the importance of interactivity, the potential impact of free pre-designed interactive learning objects, and then methods for locating, selecting, implementing, and evaluating the objects. And in addition, I'll share with you 3 learning object repositories that you can start using today in order to implement these objects into your lesson plans to improve your students' learning satisfaction, learning effectiveness, and their achievement of the learning outcomes. So I want to share my screen here. My slides for today will be available in the Google Plus page for TILO. And if you have any questions, feel free to post those, and I'll do my best to watch the questions and then answer those as best as I can. So I'll start first with a quick video. This is a quick 3-minute video to help you to start thinking about open education and the OER movement.
I need that book and this one too for an assignment. No, I can't. It's the rule. Look, I need that book. Look, I need. No, I can't. I'm inside that book. It's the rule. Look, I need that book.
Open education.
Open education.
Open education.
Open education is
the future of education.
It's user-created content that's happening outside of traditional channels.
It offers the opportunity for everybody to create and to collaborate.
Most of the majority are people who do want to learn, but they can't because they don't have the necessity.
I think the essence of education is that people want to continue to learn.
This is education that's delivered to students and individuals as they need it.
in my work, what's important is being able to meet students where they are.
Open has changed copyright because I can now grab a course, change it, make it my own because I know what my students need.
Knowledge deserves to be free.
Ideas and activities and resources that connect where they are and where I need to take them.
Open education is changing the rules.
It's only fair.
Lots of people whose voices haven't been out there in society because they aren't able to write a book. They aren't able to get published by a publisher, begin to have a voice.
You're not just one teacher in a four-walled classroom. You're one person in a network of ideas and creativity.
They can take learning out of the classroom, out of the four walls, and be in the world.
And then start teaching kids in a lot more different ways, like say maybe through music or art.
Open education is the new definition of fair.
As soon as employers start recognizing certificates earned through essentially open online resources, as other schools start recognizing the work that students have done in open education resources.
It's a game changer.
OER stands to really break down those barriers and really disrupt how people in our country and around the world will be learning.
It's about equity.
It's accessible to people in every country, places where people couldn't even afford the price of a pencil.
A lot of people think that open education is about more access to stuff. And it is about more access to stuff, but more importantly, it's about more access to people, more access to tools, and more access to new ways to create education and to do education and to learn. And that's why it's important.
Open education.
It's the new game.
It lets us create.
I'm a game changer.
I'm a game changer.
We're all game changers now.
Okay, so we're no longer as educators and as teachers bound to our classrooms. As you know, we are no longer the only source of information and expertise for our students. And we can offer our students the opportunity to interact with content that is already prepped and available. And I know myself as a teacher, it takes a lot of time to create your content and get your lesson plans ready to go. So hopefully what I offer you today will afford you resources that are already available for you and ready to go. So I first want to start off with the 4 types of interaction. The educational literature asserts 4 types of interaction, and these are probably familiar to you as educators. We have student-to-student interaction, student-to-content interaction, student-to-teacher interaction, and student-to-interface or technology interaction. And so, of course, the student-to-student interaction includes the opportunities you offer students to work with each other, whether it be in partners or small groups or even larger groups. Student-to-teacher interaction includes the time that you are working directly with your students, either through one-on-one teaching consultations or through whole class instruction. Student-to-content interaction includes practice assignments, homework, and anything else that requires your students to use content to complete tasks. And then student-to-interface interaction might include web quests, online games, simulations, iPad apps, and anything else that requires students to interact with technology or equipment, including free pre-designed interactive learning objects. So these interaction types are not isolated and exclusive of the others, and they might all be occurring simultaneously, and you probably flow seamlessly from interaction type to interaction type without even realizing it. So think about these types of interaction and whether or not you offer all 4 types in your classroom. These interactions can be offered in a variety of ways through a variety of activities or through a variety of assignments, but the quality of the interaction is what's important. The more activity required of the student, the more interactive the experience. So students must be called to action rather than having the ability to just passively watch or passively observe. So what are you offering your students to call them to action? Now, what I found in my literature review for my dissertation is exactly what you see in front of you here, that there are benefits to offering students effective interaction. And this interaction is achieved through activities or tasks that require them to act, to participate, or to behave or respond. And the interaction increases interactivity. And it's the interactivity which offers students the opportunity to be more engaged in their learning. And when students are engaged, when they're asked to act, participate, behave, respond, you're asking them and offering them an opportunity to become engaged in what you're doing in your classroom. So the educational research indicates that the engagement yields 3 important outcomes: increased learner satisfaction, increased learning effectiveness, and increased achievement of the learning outcomes. So the increased achievement might seem obvious, but the learner satisfaction and learner effectiveness is also important. So think about your students. When learners are satisfied with an experience, they're more likely to want to do that again or repeat that type of experience. And when they realize the learning wasn't arduous, they are more likely to want to continue in the learning process. So those 3 outcomes can be achieved through interactivity, and I propose that we can offer that interactivity through free pre-designed interactive learning objects. And we also need to keep in mind that the technology, and more specifically in this case the objects, which I'm going to show you some today, those are simply the tools to deliver the information. The responses required of the students, the interaction which is required of them, is what leads to the engagement. So these objects are not a solution, they're merely a tool to offer students interactivity and the opportunity to become more engaged. And so the quality of the objects we select and the manner in which we implement the objects is really vital to the success and for our ability to see these outcomes achieved. So let's examine some terminology to make sure we're all on the same page, because there are many words or acronyms used by educators to describe these small chunks of content. And through my qualitative research, I conducted interviews, and I found just from the interviews I conducted that people are calling these things by different names. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page here today. So these objects are sometimes called LOs or learning objects. OERs or open educational resources, which you saw in the video. ILMs or interactive learning materials. They can consist of simulation, games, or interactives. So the study I conducted used the terms free and pre-designed and interactive learning objects. So by definition, these are interactive web-based tools that support the learning of specific concepts, and they were previously designed by someone else, and they contain elements requiring action. So I'm looking at objects beyond static or passive resources like electronic textbooks or ebooks or videos that require just passive observation from students, but going beyond just taking in information, but also requiring some output from our students. And so my study focused on interactive objects that were free and already designed by someone else. So these objects might require students to drag and drop things on the screen or organize digital images, or read, watch, or listen and respond to questions or prompts. Sometimes they require students to select digital items based on a task or solve problems by building or manipulating digital objects. And the key here is that they're chunked pieces of content. So they focus on one or two specific learning objectives. So what I was looking at was not online courses, but what are those small chunks or those small objects that help students achieve one or two learning objectives. And some of the objects can be downloaded or shared via a Google Classroom or other learning management system. Some can be embedded into a teacher web page, and some might offer a special link for students for easy navigation to the object. And many of these objects are housed in repositories or digital multimedia libraries. And it's important to note that the repositories are simply libraries that point to or link out to resources that can be found on the internet. So some of these objects could possibly be found through a Google search, but the benefit of using the repositories are that they often, the repositories are searchable, they're categorized, they offer explanations and even peer review of the materials. And so starting in a repository is often better than starting with a Google search because the repository contains metadata or information that explains the objects. So how they can be used, what previous users or reviewers of the objects think of them, and other features that we'll look at here in a moment. So here's one sample. This is just a screenshot of an interactive learning object that I located in the Merlot repository, which you can see the Merlot link, and then you can also see the link where this interactive object can actually be located through wiley.com. So this object is chunked around the topic of photosynthesis. Students will read and click and navigate through the topics in the object, and they'll see things moving on the screen, and they'll see concepts and will be asked questions then to test their knowledge. So that's where the interaction part comes in. The student is clicking, reading, and answering questions. So the assessment comes in the form of pop-up questions as the student navigates through the object. And the interaction calls on students to just remember and comprehend the information that they're learning from the object. And this is informal and formative assessment or a self-check of whether or not they understood the concepts presented here. And so here's a second example, just a screenshot again. I located this object in the OER Commons repository, which we'll take a look at today in depth. It deals with a concept or the topic of fractions, and students are able to click to change the denominator and then add the pieces to the numerator to view different fractions in different forms, from circles and other shapes, 3D cylinders, cakes, as well as number lines. So students can also click the tabs at the top to view various games, and which offers various levels of skill. So students are given fractions and asked to fill in shapes with the appropriate pieces, show equality of fractions using different shapes, and then also match fractions in various forms. So this is a great activity for students to test their own knowledge of fractions and just do some practice, some drill and skill and drill. And a third example, which I'll actually showcase today, we'll see how this one works. This object was located in the PBS Learning Media Repository, which is a rich repository, especially for K through 12 educators. Students are offered the opportunity to build a variety of different triangles using the virtual linkage strips. And if you're a math teacher, you might actually have these physical linkage strips in your classroom. This is a great way for students to practice with those strips at home, or if your classroom can't afford the actual physical strips. So it's highly interactive, but it also comes with other materials, teacher materials, which I'll demonstrate for you near the end of this presentation. So when I first started this, my assumption was that since these are free, pre-designed interactive learning objects, educators would be interested in them because they're free. So you're obviously saving money, which is important, especially in schools that have limited educator budgets. And you're saving time because it's pre-designed by someone else. So, but I want to say cautiously, I cautiously want to say that you are saving time, because in reality, and if you've tried to dive into some of these repositories, you know this is true. You could spend hours and hours digging through learning object repositories if you don't have a system. So it's critical, and that's really what my study sought to discover, was what is a good system for using these repositories, because there's so much available that you can often find yourself feeling lost and like you're chasing a rabbit trail without yielding any good search results if you don't have a plan or a system for locating, selecting, implementing, and then ultimately evaluating whether or not this was time well spent for you and your students. So I want to point to a resource. This is the only guide that I could locate through my dissertation study that helps educators on the quest of finding, choosing, and using interactive open educational resources, or free pre-designed interactive learning objects, as I call them. So in 2014, which is fairly recent, John Shank published a guide that outlined the need for interactive technology learning materials. And he realized that there were just hundreds and hundreds of these objects out there, but they were difficult to sift through and to find a strategy for yielding good results. So his book is rich with specific information about a number of repositories. And the title of the book would indicate that since it's a guide to finding, choosing, and using what's out there to transform college teaching, it indicates that it's good for college educators, but I find it also very applicable to pre-K through 12 educators as well. And I'll show you a couple of the repositories today that he showcased in his book. So he offers lists and repositories by discipline and specific searching tips for each repository. And he also points or links to video tutorials that he created to showcase searching strategies for many of the repositories. So I want to highly recommend this book for any educator wanting to know more or do more with interactive learning objects. So my dissertation study asked community college instructional designers how they were locating, selecting, implementing, and evaluating free pre-designed interactive learning objects. Or, and the second part of my question was, what are the reasons these objects are not being used at all? And so I interviewed 11 community college instructional designers. Out of those 11, 3 of them were users of the free pre-designed interactive learning objects, and 8 of them were not users of the objects. So my study, although small in nature, found that for my particular group of participants, more instructional designers were not using them, and that there were specific reasons they were not using them. So this is troubling to me, though, as an educator, because of the sheer number of free pre-designed objects that are available online. There are thousands of objects available, but as my study indicated, and as John Shank's book points out, these objects are difficult to find, and so they're not being fully utilized. So today I'll share with you some strategies offered by the participants in my study, and I'll highlight some of the roadblocks that they mentioned so that we can start to find ways to avoid those roadblocks. So for my users, the first question I ask them is, how are you locating these objects? And honestly, they are searching and digging. The reality is that they didn't really have a system. They were just, one in particular, he would just start with a Google search, and he would go from there. Another participant stated that she was just stubborn, and she was just going to search and dig until she found what she needed. Other things mentioned included internal departments, leading faculty or teachers to these objects. So maybe they have a resource in the library that points teachers to these objects, which I would recommend that any school or institution that supports teachers provide lists of where these objects can be found, which would be very helpful. And then another strategy listed for locating was just talking with other faculty. What are other people using, and what repositories are they finding the best results in? So my second question to my users was, how are you selecting the objects? How do you know when you've found an appropriate object to implement? So the most common answer was that it's content-based. So they started with with content in mind, and they went in to focus in on the content level first, and then the grade level. So a lot of these repositories, when people add their objects that they created to the repositories, they'll list a grade level. And it's important to preview and just ensure that, yeah, that grade level probably is, that label is appropriate for my students. At the college level, some people, a couple participants mentioned that because they're at community colleges, some of the higher education objects were a little bit too high for some of their entry-level students. So they had to also look in the high school category as well to find things that were appropriate. So other things the users look for when selecting is the author credible? Well, who created this object? Was it an organization that was sponsored by someone? Is there any bias in the object? Is the content correct or accurate? They also look at learning objectives and whether or not they need to modify the object. A lot of times the objects are what you see is what you get, and there's not really a way to modify. And honestly, modifying a pre-designed object might take quite a bit of time. So the instructional designers in my study were looking for objects that they did not need to modify, that were pretty much 100% of what they needed. So then my next question to the users were, how are you implementing them? What are you doing? So you've located a good repository, you've selected an appropriate object, so now what? And so some interesting things surfaced. The participants talked about how they get the students to the objects. So there's a couple ways to do that. You can link students out to the objects. So you might have a Google Classroom or a teacher webpage, and you just simply offer a link, and the students go to the source to find the object and use it. Another strategy that was discussed was fitting them in according to the learning objectives. So making sure you've placed it in the appropriate section of the lesson plan. You know, do you have any pre-instruction to give before students see the object? And then what are you going to do with that information after they've completed their work with the object? So sequencing and scaffolding is important here. And then another way, some objects are, you are able to embed them. So some are, you're able to embed them into, again, a Google Classroom or a teacher webpage. And then another participant talked about wrapping the content. And that kind of fits in with fitting them in according to the learning objective, but making sure students understand the purpose of the object. It's not just because it's a cool, a cool activity with shapes and objects, and you're building the pieces of the pie. But why are they learning it? the instructional designers I talked to stated that the students want to know, why am I using this object and what does it mean and what am I supposed to learn from it? So maybe adding an introductory piece to your class where you talk about the information before introducing them to the object. And then I asked also, how are you evaluating these objects? How do you know the object made a difference? And that can be debatable because there are so many variables when you look at something like this. But some strategies that surfaced are course assessments. So that would just be like a quiz at the end of your that particular lesson plan or that learning module. Some people were just looking for improved learning. And again, that could be students seem to be learning the information more easily, or they were learning it better. They also rely on faculty feedback or feedback from their teacher peers. What are the other faculty members saying about it? And then student feedback. So if you have a group of students in your classroom and they're all working on an object on their iPad, of course you're going to hear things from students anecdotally about, is it easy to use, or I don't understand why we're doing this, or this doesn't really make sense. So you need to listen to that student feedback. And then a couple that didn't emerge as themes, but that were mentioned, one participant in particular used focus groups. So her team would locate objects, and then they would bring a group of students together after the class and really ask them specific questions. Did they like the objects? Did they find them helpful? Did they feel that they made a difference? And then an important strategy, which is why I have it in italics, I think that did come up during my study, is testing the objects ahead of time. So making sure making sure they work, but doing that before you implement it. So having maybe your son or daughter at home check it out. I know my son likes to look at some of the math learning objects that I locate. He likes to play around with those. Maybe asking some older students, maybe in a grade above your students, and just asking them, hey, what do you think about these objects? Did it work on your iPad versus did it work on your iPod? Is it cross-platform? And those types of questions in order to evaluate before implementing. So then, of course, to give you, to make sure you're fully informed, I do want to also share with you the issues that were discussed by participants in my study, both users and non-users of the objects. I asked, what are the important issues to consider if you're planning on or you're thinking about implementing free pre-designed interactive learning objects? So after my interviews, and because I am an educator and I train educators, in my opinion, all of these issues can be avoided or curbed in some way. So, for example, 9 of 11 participants mentioned that time is an issue. So if you spend the time to research the repositories and locate the best repositories for you and for your students, and then take advantage of the tutorials that those repositories offer, you'll actually end up, in my opinion, saving time in the end. So, but you do have to put that time in at the beginning. And John Shank's book that I mentioned earlier is a great place to start because he actually did the work for us and went in to evaluate these repositories and found the best way to search them. So I'll demonstrate that in a couple repositories today to help you get started. So 7 of 11 mentioned faculty buy-in or acceptance as an issue. So the research supports the use of the interactive elements for the current student generation, and there are positive outcomes. So why are faculty not buying in? But if we understand the research and we test it out ourselves, we can share some success stories with other teachers, with other faculty, and hopefully the buy-in and acceptance will increase. And then trainings like this, or even more in depth than this on how to actually search through the repositories might help with the faculty buy-in. Quality and budget and knowledge of what's out there, those were mentioned by 5 of the 11 participants. So quality, one of the participants stated, just like anything else, there's good and there's bad. There's going to be quality products and less than quality products. So the trick is learning how to best search to find quality items and items that you're actually looking for. And some repositories have a peer rating or a professional or external review of the objects that they offer. Some of them allow users to comment on objects so that when you go in to look at it, you can see what people have commented on before you go in and look at that object in too much depth. So budget surprised me because I just assumed, well, they're free, so there are not going to be any budget concerns, but the participants that I interviewed stated that they have so much work to do and the budget is too small to hire extra people. So there's just not, the budget really impacts the time they have available to search for objects. But if you, in my opinion, again, if you spend the time getting to know the repositories and then utilizing them, you'll actually end up saving time and possibly money in the end. And then accessibility, and I do want to spend a little bit of time on this one because this concerns both cross-platform use as well as ADA compliance. So one of my participants in particular mentioned that some of the objects aren't iOS and Android compatible. So you have to consider, are your students using iOS? Are they using Android operating systems? Are they using phones or tablets or PCs? And it really is important that you test the objects on different platforms depending on how your students are going to access them. So some repositories are offering platform filters where you can filter out or filter in certain operating systems or devices that students will be using. And for ADA compliance, you may have students with learning difficulties or disabilities, so it's with anything else that you implement as well. It's important you consider any unique needs that your student might have as you select objects. Okay, so I have about 15 to 20 minutes left. I do want to jump into 3 of these repositories. So we're going to look at, if you want to jot this down or pull up my slides later, that's fine. We're going to go into pbslearningmedia.org. We're going to go into oercommons.org. And we're going to go into merlot.org. And so first we'll go into PBS Learning Media, and I did create an account. It's free, so you can have a free account. It gives you a dashboard option where you can store favorites, create folders, create your profile, view different tools that you might not have if you don't have an account created. Let's see. So what I want to do is show you this quick video. And let me see. Yes, it's this.
Remember how PBS shaped your world and fueled your imagination? Now use PBS in your classroom to inspire a new generation of learners with PBS Learning Media. With PBS Learning Media, you have access to trustworthy, classroom-ready, curriculum-targeted resources anytime you need it. PBS Learning Media is filled with over 100,000 original, compelling, and dynamic games, videos, and interactive resources that span all subject areas, from in-depth STEM content to 18th century art collections and videos that explore U.S. history. With PBS Learning Media, searching is simple. Just enter a keyword and begin building your personalized lesson plan.
Me, life with a drama averaged out.
Search results can be filtered by grade level, media type, and national and Common Core education standards, so you can find materials that speak directly to your students while staying age appropriate. Looking for more information on a topic? Visit our collection pages for for suggestions on how to breathe life into a historic speech or other topic.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation.
Find a lesson you love, create favorites and folders to revisit later, and share with your colleagues and students.
The world's greatest piece of surrealist art.
With PBS Learning Media, video streaming requirements are not an obstacle. The majority of our resources are available for download. Teaching in a resource-strapped environment, registration is easy and free. Just create an account and gain instant access. So join our community of over 1 million educators impacted by PBS Learning Media and empowering their students with active learning. PBS Learning Media, infinite inspiration for your classroom.
Okay, so that explains a lot of the features of PBS Learning Media, and I want to go ahead and do a search with you to show you how easy it is to use. So I'm going to start by browsing the standards. I know we are all sometimes tied to our standards, so sometimes it's interesting what you can find if you have a specific Common Core standard or national standard that you're trying to meet with your students. So I'm going to select Common Core state standards, and for my document, I'm going to select the K-12 mathematics, and in that is also college and career readiness standards. So then I'm going to browse. Oh, and I wanted to also select grade 7. So that's going to pull up for me all of the content standards related to grade 7 and math. So I'm going to select the draw, construct, and describe geometrical figures and describe the relationships between them. And so now I have some filters available. And so because this particular presentation focuses on interactive, I'm going to select interactive, but I want to show you first, I have 101 results. And so I'm going to select interactive. And that brought me down to 41 results, which is still quite a few if I want to just kind of dig through them. So I can also look at other filters on the side here. But I was in here before, and I know for sure I want to look again at this constructing triangles. And so I think this repository does a nice job of letting us know before we dig too far into the object what we're getting ourselves into. So this icon, on the last page you saw some different icons. This icon indicates that it's interactive. This icon indicates that there are support materials available, and actually there's some really nice support materials that go along with this, including some lesson plan suggestions. I have favorited this particular activity. I can share it, and I can do a quick assign. So the sharing, I can share to my Google Classroom. I can share it on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter. I can also email it to my students. And the information here, it tells what grades it's usually used for, how I'm permitted to use it. So I can only stream this one, so I need to link my students out to this one. And it's received 24 favorites, and over 3,000 people have viewed this particular object. So I'm going to go ahead and click launch. And so it gives the students directions. We're going to use the linkage strip activity to determine which side links can form a triangle. And I'll start, and there are some pretty nice directions, but in case that's confusing for students or for you as you get started, you can look at their instructions. It's always nice when they come with instructions. And then I can just kind of play around with this and see if I can make a triangle. And I can, but then I have to know, can I deform the triangle? So for those of you who teach math, you'll know what that means. And then I can play around with it and make different sizes and shapes to see what makes a triangle and what doesn't, because sometimes it's not going to make a triangle. Okay. So other things that are on this page that I find very helpful, it's a description of the activity, and then there's a link to Annenberg Lerner's professional development course for teachers, which goes through videos and other things on how to use these strips, which I find very helpful. Under support materials, you'll find activities which offer learning outcomes. So you have some of those already written for the activity. It directly relates to this particular Common Core standard, and there's some vocabulary offered. And then as we go down, you can see that there's really a lesson plan to help you scaffold and sequence this particular object into your lesson plan appropriately. And then there's some extensions too, which are really nice for your more advanced students. And then there is a student handout, which is a worksheet that goes along with the object. So the student would have the piece of paper and fill that out as they work with the object. And then, very nice, there's an answer key for teachers, so you don't have to create your own answer key. And then under educational standards, you can see that if I was looking at this from the national standards, it aligns this particular object with these particular standards, national standards, and then these Common Core state standards. So I find all of that very helpful as an educator, as a teacher who wants to use this in the classroom. And then I also like these, that it offers you might also like sections where you can watch something else or lead to another interactive piece. And this one deals with a video of students building a truss bridge, of course, using triangles, so the same concept. So if you are watching live and you don't mind just jotting into the question, the Q&A section, have you used PBS Learning Media? Do you find it helpful? Do you have particular questions about this particular resource? So the other thing I like about this particular repository is I can create folders. So today I created, or to prepare for this, I created a TILO sample folder. So whatever I found, I was going to just drop into this folder. So I have created my folder, but if you had different classes you were prepping for, or you had different lesson plans you wanted specific folders for, you can create your folders and really get everything organized. And then these tools to actually build some lessons out of these objects are very helpful. Okay, so that's PBS Learning Media. The next one is OER Commons. And I find this one is also helpful if you're looking for to meet particular standards, national standards or Common Core standards. So OER Commons, I'm just going to do a quick search here, and I'm going to pick my standard. And for this one, I'm going to select Common Core English, and I'm going to search. Okay, and I'm going to select grade 7, again, because that's the grade that I taught. And the learning domain, I'm going to select writing. And I'm looking for something to help my students with writing, because right now they might be struggling with that. And so I need something to help them learn to read for information out of informational text. And so, again, because we're talking about interactive materials, and you can see I have 99 results right now. That's a lot. So I want to get that down a little bit, and they do have the option to select interactive, and that's what I'm looking for because I know the benefits of providing interactive materials. And so now I have 5 results. Yeah, now I can spend the time sort of digging through these. And so my students are struggling with using primary sources and analyzing those. So I'm going to look at this primary source analysis tool, and you can read about it before you click on it and dig too deep into it. And wasting time if it's not, you know, exactly what you were looking for. It talks about the subjects. So it has some, it's been tagged with different topics. And I can see that it's the Library of Congress. So probably a pretty good resource. So I'm going to click on it. And so now I have even more metadata. I have the standard, the Common Core standard English language arts that I'm meeting here. And I have some metadata over here: subjects, provider, level, grades, material type, media format, which might be important depending on how your students are accessing this particular object. And so I'm going to view, there aren't any comments yet, but if there were, I could read those there. So I'm going to view the resource. And this is a very interesting worksheet, because I've seen this type of worksheet before, and yeah, I've probably used this when I taught 7th grade. But what I like about this is it offers these little question mark bubbles. So you could literally tell your students, go ahead and open up this document, and then I want you to answer each question underneath each section. So click on the bubble, and then it's going to prompt the student after they've read the primary source to answer these questions. So what do you notice first? So they're going to answer that, and then they're going to write about something small but interesting, and then they'll write about something they noticed that they didn't expect. And then it walks through 5 prompts to guide them. It's interactive, and it allows them to sequence through that in the way they see fit, and they're not in lockstep with you. They can sort of go ahead and slow down when they need to. Same with reflect. There are prompts, and of course more prompts over here, which help them to start to wonder or question what it is they're reading and think a little bit deeper. And then further investigation, what would they want to know more about? And then you could even say, okay, my students are sort of advanced, so I'm going to have them do the advanced follow-up activity. So you could just let students know ahead of time, this is the particular activity I want you to complete when you come into this worksheet. And then once it's all filled out, they can download it, they can print it, and they can even email it directly to you. So pretty handy. So if you don't mind, in the chat, if you've used OER or have questions about it, please let me know. I'd love to hear what you think about the OER. And then next we'll go over to Merlot. And I do want to point out that Merlot is one of the oldest and largest online repositories. So they're pretty developed in their content, and they're pretty progressive in the peer reviews that they have available. I'm a Quality Matters Master Reviewer, and I've done some reviews of some of their materials as an external reviewer, and I've offered input and insight and recommendations for some of their objects they have. Some of their online courses they have. But I wanted to point out Merlot.org, if you just search that in YouTube, you'll find Merlot Place, and they offer some tutorial videos to help you learn how to use their repository. So if you're not really sure how to use it, this is a great place to start. So over on Merlot, let's see, I'm going to search Merlot. Merlot is probably a more broad repository than the other two that I've showed you. They have members, they have they call it the grapevine. Everything's related to, they're based out of California. So of course they have named everything after wine and grapes. So they have their like a grapevine newsletter, and it's a pretty interesting site, and you can dig pretty deep into it. But I just want to show you today how to do an advanced search. So I'm going to click Search Merlot, and they have a pretty nice interface that's really easy to use. You can do a simple keyword search right here, or you can do an advanced material search, which is what I prefer to do. And now here's something I learned from John Shank's book. Merlot does not recognize Boolean search terms, but they do recognize quotes. So if I were to type in For example, one day I was in here looking for things on moon phases, and I could not find anything on moon phases. And then in John Shank's book, he says to use the quotes. Well, as soon as I typed in quote moon phases, end quote, I had tons of things about moon phases. It was pulling up exactly what I was asking for. So I'm going to search periodic table in quotes because I don't want to search periodic and table separately. I have tried these, but the quotes really work a lot better than selecting these over here. So I'm going to type in periodic table, and I know I want it to be under the science area, and I know I want it to be in chemistry, and I'm going to leave everything else blank. Even though I have all of these options, this is one that allows you to filter in devices and operating systems. But I'm going to leave it blank because I want to see how many search results I can get. So I'm going to search. And I should end up with, if I'm doing my search correctly, I should end up with just over 100 search results, which is quite a few. Again, if I'm just coming in to sort of dig around, I don't want to spend the time going through 119 results. I want to pare this down as closely as I can. So I do know, though, again, you can filter even further. We're talking about interactivity. So I want my students to do a drill and practice. Maybe they're struggling with the periodic table, and I like that it shows me before I even select it how many search results are in that particular material type. So I know that there are 4 drill and practice. So now I have my 4, and so I have these options. Now, what I like about Merlot is this information that is typed is very telling. So some of these, I've seen some before where the description is sluggish website, doesn't work as great as it could. So I know I'm probably not going to waste my time looking at those particular items if it says something like that. But I'm going to go ahead and click on Online Periodic Table and Elements Flashcards. And you can see that it's going to link me out. Remember, these items aren't housed in Merlot or in these repositories. They are linking out to the source, so where we can find these. But here I can see it's easy to use. I can read about it. I can even come down here, and 5 years ago, somebody commented on this and said it's well laid out, instant feedback, the ability to narrow the cards. So pretty good. A pretty good recommendation. So maybe I'm going to click on it and go to that. And so I have looked at this before, and I know it's a good resource. So I'm going to find, let me see, I want 5 questions. I want everything there, and I am going to select that they're properly capitalized. I'm ready to start. And so I'm just going to come in and say, I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to say BR so I can get it wrong. Check my answer, and it says nope, that's not exactly what it is. It's GD, and I can tell me more about it. So as a student, I can come in here and maybe review the information. I can ask how I'm doing so far. So I've had 1 question and I was incorrect. I have a 0%. And I can start over. I can start over with the same settings, and I can return to the game. So, so just some interesting things there from Merlot. So that's the information I wanted to present today. I hope you have found it helpful. I hope this has given you a pretty good start on getting into some of the repositories and learning how to use them. And so I'll turn it back over.
Okay, first of all, we would like to thank Lynn for presenting today and all that helpful information. Again, you can access this on our Google Plus event page for TILO, Technology Integration Leaders of Ohio. I do want to mention a couple things. As Lynn pointed out, her presentation is also under the YouTube link to get to the video. So if you go to our TILO Google Plus page and click on the link below, her presentation is linked out there, so feel free to access that. Your feedback is also very important to us. So again, underneath her presentation on that same page of the TILO event page on Google Plus, there is a link to provide us some feedback for all these webinars, as well as if you've registered, you will be getting soon a direct link for that feedback URL. There's two last things I just want to mention real quick. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so this first part, go ahead. I don't know why I can't get out there. Let me try that one more time. Lynn, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, just not sure why I can't. Well, first of all, while I'm here, I'm sorry about that. While I'm here, I just wanted to point out on this particular screen, if you scroll down just a little bit, I'm not sure why I can't scroll down there, but on this particular screen, her presentation is linked below. And I'm going to go ahead and close out here and get to another page so I can show you here as well. Okay, so one more time, the second thing I wanted to present to you was this website, which is tiloohio.org/calendar, is our TILO website. And this calendar does house all of the webinars that we are offering. So feel free to check back, you know, in the upcoming months for all these webinars, and you can sign up, you can register for them. And then all of these webinars are also Hangouts on Air. So they are then recorded and then put on our Google Plus event page as well for TILO. So if you are unable to attend any of the webinars in person or, you know, on through the web, we do record all of them so that you can access them at a later point in time. So I would like to, and I'm going to switch back to there we go. I would like to thank Lynn again and for presenting, and then I would also like to thank all of you that have joined us, and then all of you that are going to join us in the future. So thank you again, and we look forward to sharing again any kind of information that you can provide. Thank you.